Do you know that 1 out of every 20 people in the world is deaf? But I bet when most of you think of the word deaf, you probably think of the medical term of someone not being able to hear, or maybe even it as a negative thing. I've learned that deafness is so much more than what most of society sees it as. For someone to consider themselves to be culturally deaf, it means that they're part of a larger universal community. The deaf community has its own language, history, and traditions that make it unique and special. The whole world sees the idea of being deaf as a negative thing, but people who are part of the deaf community see it as the exact opposite. In a world of hearing, deaf people have a sense of pride in their uniqueness. They like being different and feel that not being able to hear enriches their lives. One of the things that the deaf community is most proud of is their language, sign language. Sign language is a language made out of different hand signals and gestures to replace words and phrases. The difference between spoken and sign languages are the people using them. People that could hear like you and me see the world quite differently than someone who is deaf. We see the world using a mixture of all our senses, while someone who is deaf sees the world through visuals since they can't hear what's around them. One of the most popular forms of sign language is American Sign Language, or ASL. ASL being created was a milestone that paved the way for a real deaf culture to be formed. In the early 1800s, a man named Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet was passionate for teaching deaf children, but he found it difficult to do so since there was no language that existed. He decided to travel to Europe, where he could meet with other deaf educators and learn more. They were so intrigued by his idea that some of them decided to travel back to America with him to help make his idea a reality. Gallaudet and 2 others ended up opening a school for the deaf. Between the educators and students that went there, they all came together and made up a new language which is known today as ASL. For some people in the deaf community, having a language like ASL is just enough for them, while others would like to hear normally. One of the most important devices in the deaf community is a cochlear implant. Cochlear implants are surgically implanted devices designed to do the job for damaged parts of the inner ear. Most people have heard of hearing aids before, but these devices are quite different. Hearing aids are meant for people who have hearing loss, and their job is to amplify the sound, while cochlear implants are mainly used by deaf people, and their job is to not only amplify the sound, but make sure that they can hear entirely normal. Although cochlear implants are not something that every person in the deaf community chooses to use, they definitely have a large impact on the community as a whole. There are thousands of success stories where cochlear implants have changed people's lives. One of those people is Schwabe. She started to lose her hearing at the age of 20, and after years of hearing aids, she longed for a more authentic way to hear. After successful cochlear implant surgery, she states, "It has absolutely, unequivocally, irreversibly changed our lives. I can hear. I cannot express my gratitude for this miracle of restored hearing." The deaf community has begun to have more and more of a place in society. It started back a couple hundred years ago when the first deaf schools began to open, all the way until today, where the deaf community has the same rights as anyone else, universities where they can get a great education, and the ability to choose any profession that they desire. One of the most celebrated universities in the deaf community is Gallaudet University. The university opened by and named after Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet in 1857 and has become a worldwide famous university today. Throughout the deaf community, there are many great organizations that are super involved in fighting for new rights and laws that still need public attention. One of these organizations is the National Association of the Deaf, or the NAD. The NAD is great because it's one of the longest living deaf-created organizations. They're super involved in fighting for new rights and issues. In the early days, they fought for deaf schools, and today they're fighting for new rights, such as captioned sports games and deaf-friendly hotel rooms. The deaf community is still fighting for its rightful place to be seen and heard, but despite this, the community has definitely grown and changed for the better. A couple of hundred years ago, one man set out to make a change in the education and language of the deaf community. He wasn't able to do it alone, but with the help from other people, he was able to make large changes. This idea of coming together and sense of community still reflects on deaf culture today. Gallaudet's belief of education, language, and community was an idea worth spreading, and educating more people on this community can make even more change. That's why I think it's an idea definitely worth spreading. Thank you.